It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today. Peter's not a politician, never elected, haven't elected office. He's a Connecticut native, third generation, graduate of University of California, Berkeley, and studied finance and accounting. Successful businessman, best-selling author, and economic expert. I'd like to introduce Peter Schiff.
How many fines I'm going to earn for this speech. But anyway, let me tell you a little bit about why I'm running for office. Because a lot of people ask me why I'm running. I am a businessman, and a lot of people don't want the aggravation of running for office. It's certainly a big pay cut for me. So why am I doing it? And the reality is, I've been a big critic of Washington for a long time. My investment strategy at my brokerage firm is always about trying to protect my clients from the policies coming out of Washington that have been undermining our economy, that have been destroying the value of our industries, that have been debasing the value of our money. And because of all the mistakes that Washington has made, I've had to formulate an investment strategy to guard against that. And at this point, I think the country is in such grave danger of a major economic meltdown that just thinking of ways to protect money or to profit from what's happening, it's no longer something that I'm content to do. I want to actually try to go to Washington to see if I can stop this, to see if I can stop this train wreck from actually happening. And it's not going to be an easy task, but I'm certainly willing to try to do it if Connecticut voters will give me that opportunity. You see, right now, I think the biggest problem that we face is the government itself. The country is in a mess, but it's in a mess because of misguided fiscal policy, regulatory policy, monetary policy. We haven't had a failure of free markets. We haven't had a failure of capitalism. We've had a failure of socialism, and it shouldn't be surprising that socialism failed. I mean, it's failed everywhere it's tried. We shouldn't expect it to be any different here in the United States. And at this point, the government has grown like a cancer to try to solve a problem that it created. The federal budget that Barack Obama just proposed for this coming fiscal year is almost $4 trillion. It's $3.8 trillion. To let you know how enormous $3.8 trillion is, that is twice what the federal government spent 10 years ago. Twice. Now, I remember the year 2000. I thought the federal government was too big back then. It's now twice the size. How can we as Americans, how can we as taxpayers afford a government that's twice as big as the one that we had 10 years ago? I mean, does everybody in America have twice the income that they had 10 years ago? Have their stocks, are they worth twice as much as they were? Is your house worth twice as much? How can that be that the government is so much bigger, yet we're no wealthier? In fact, we're actually poorer. A lot of Americans are actually earning less than they did 10 years ago. And part of the reason is because the government is so big. I found out for the first time about a few weeks ago how much we're paying our government employees. I didn't even realize that it had gotten this out of control. But federal workers, our employees, on average, and this is non-military, civilian employees, on average, they're earning 60% more than workers in the private sector. 60% more. And that's just cash. If you actually include the value of their generous health care benefits and pension benefits, they're out earning us 2 to 1. 2 to 1. These are our servants. They work for us. How can they earn twice what we do? None of this makes sense. There was a point in American history where it was the reverse, where if you worked in government, you actually made less. That was the sacrifice. You took a civil service type job, and you earned less as a result. Maybe you had more job security, but you certainly earned less. Now, they earn more. We can't afford these lavish pay packs. The government is running out of control. We have to slash government spending right now. You see, the bigger the government gets, the weaker the economy gets. Because when the government grows, it has to suck the revenues out of the private sector. It's like a cancer, and it feeds off the real economy. So we can't grow the government and grow the economy. It's either or.
And right now, it's the government that's growing. So if you want to know why so many people can't find jobs, it's because the government is so big that it's destroying the private sector. Resources that normally would be available to finance businesses and provide for employment opportunities, those resources are no longer here because the government took them. We're running an enormous deficit. Of that $3.8 trillion that I said the government's going to spend, they're actually only collecting about 2.2 trillion in taxes, which is still a lot of money. But the other 1.6 trillion, they're borrowing that money. They're spending $1.60 for every dollar they earn. And they actually have the nerve to say that that's a budget. I mean, how can you set out to make a budget and budget to spend 60% more than you earn? Right? You can't do that. They think they can get away with it because they're borrowing the money. But the problem is, borrowing it from whom? We're all broke. We don't have any money to lend to the government. The money is coming from China, it's coming from Japan, it's coming from Saudi Arabia. But they're going to get tired of it because they know we can't pay it back. And to the extent that we have some money, people want to know, why is there no credit for business? How come the banks aren't lending? The banks are lending. The problem is they're lending to the federal government. That's where all the money is going. It's going to buy government bonds. There's nothing left for businesses to expand. No wonder they can't hire anybody. There is no credit. It's gone. The government's gobbled it all up. There's not an infinite amount of it. It comes from savings. If the government borrows it, it's not available to the private sector. The government says that they need to stimulate the economy. But their idea of stimulus is more government. That's not a stimulant. That's a sedative. That's why the economy is a mess. And if you look at what the government wants to stimulate, they don't want to stimulate real economic activity. They're trying to stimulate spending, consumption. They want to encourage Americans to go out and buy more stuff that they can't afford. Things that we shouldn't have been buying in the first place. Now they want us to buy more. And they want to spend it on more government services that we can't afford and that we don't need. And all we're doing is digging ourselves into a deeper hole. Right? The government is claiming that the economy is recovering. Of course, they're claiming that it's a jobless recovery. But the reason it's jobless is because it's not really recovering. We're not recovering from anything. We're actually exacerbating the disease that we suffer from. Now, as I said, the problems that we have today are serious, but they're not the result of failures in the market. They're the result of failures in government. You know, George Bush gave a speech almost towards the end of his term, and he said that Wall Street got drunk, and that's why they did all these stupid things. The issue isn't that Wall Street was drunk, because clearly they were, but so was Main Street. The whole country was drunk. What Bush didn't understand is why they were drunk. Where'd the alcohol come from? Right? The alcohol came from the government, came from the Federal Reserve. Alan Greenspan liquored everybody up. And of course they did foolish things under the influence of all that cheap money, things that they never would have done if the market was setting interest rates instead of Alan Greenspan. And also a lot of loans that people were making on mortgages, they never would have been made had the government not guaranteed the loans in the first place through Freddie and Fannie. The biggest problems in the real estate market were Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. They were not private sector creatures. They were creatures of government. And the only reason that they could guarantee $5 or $6 trillion worth of mortgages that people couldn't repay was because the federal government stood behind their guarantee. If the federal government guarantee wasn't there, none of these mortgages could have been originated because nobody would have loaned the money. It was the moral hazard that the government created. And I understand these problems because I don't talk about the financial crisis in hindsight. I was talking about it in advance. Right? Nobody in this country was warning louder than I was about the problems that were coming in 2008. I mean, I wrote a book called Crash Proof, How to Profit from the Economic Collapse. I wrote that book in 2005 through mid-2006. And in that book, I wrote about the housing bubble and the fact that it was going to burst, and that when it did, it would bankrupt our financial institutions, including Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. I wrote that it was going to usher in real estate prices that would collapse 30 to 50% nationwide, that would bring in the biggest recession since the Great Depression, that unemployment would rise into the double digits. And I also forecast that the government would look to solve these problems